Well, I wrote this song for the Christian youth. I want to teach kids the Christian truth. If you want to reach those kids on the street, then you gotta do a rap to a hip-hop beat. So I gave my sermon an urban kick. My rhymes are fly, my beats are sick. My crew is big and it keeps getting bigger. That's 'cause Jesus Christ is my nigga. Woo! He's a life changer, miracle arranger, born to the virgin mom in a manger. Water to wine, he's a drink exchanger, and he died for your sins. I preach the word, that's my gig, and I rhyme better than Notorious Big. All the other MCs, I wish them well, but if you live in sin, you burn in hell. Now I'ma pass the mic to my lovely wife. She's a fly MC and the light of my life. So to bust a rhyme without further ado, take it away, Mary Sue.
Jesus Christ is my nigga. He's the son of the original G. And he was sent to earth to elucidate the way that we should be. What? Like if another MC says, you're a freak, you're a lame butt rapper and your rhymes are weak. I don't get mad and I don't critique. I forgive him and turn the other cheek. I don't blaspheme and I don't brag. I don't cuss and my pants don't sag. I do exude a little Christian swag and I'm proud to be an American.
Jesus Christ is a nigga. Let his light shine through ya. Let his love pop a cap in your butt and say hallelujah. Jesus Christ is a nigga. He's a homie MC, JC, you see. He's an honest, caring, peace-loving nigga like me. If you do drugs and you think you're cool, you need to come to Sunday school. Put those drugs in a garbage can. Stand up tall, you're a Christian man. Word up. I'm freestyling.
Hit me.
Welcome everybody to another edition of the Pocket Locker Podcast. I am your host with the most, all the way from the East Coast. And as always, folks, I am in airplane mode. All right, gang, it is time for us to launch on into this one. Y'all already know what to do. We need to start with our communion. Please raise your glasses and hold on to your asses. Through him, with him, in the unity of the flying man. All glory and honor is yours who fight for our sins forever and ever. You may drink. Nice. All right, and now for our communion song. This one comes to us from Lake Street Dive. It is called Thank You for Being a Friend.
Thank you for being a friend. Traveling down the road and back again. Your heart is true. You're a pal and a confidant. I'm not ashamed to say I
Here we go.
And if we threw a party and invited everyone,
45 is a curse number.
you would see the biggest gift would be from me, and the card attached would say thank
It's everyone's unlucky number.
Thank you for being a friend.
Literally the whole world was fucked by 45.
Thank you for being a friend.
Hey, Carrie Ann.
If it's a car you like, I'll surely buy you a Cadillac.
Alright, I had YouTube Punk first. Look at the trees second. And Carrie Ann Chrysler, number 30.
I'm not ashamed to say, I hope it always stays this way. My hat is off, won't you stand up and take a bow? When we both get older, with a walking sticks and hair gray, have no fear, even though it's hard to hear.
I will stand up close and say thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being a friend. Oh, thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being a friend. I wanna tell you about a friend. Thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being a friend. And when we die and float away into the stars, the Milky Way.
You hear me call as we ascend. I'll say your name.
I love the way their background matches the stream's background.
Thank you for being a. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for being
Oh yeah, they're all so good. And they all sing together. Hey, Finch. Oh, great, awesome. Thanks, Finch.
Thank you right now for being a friend. I wanna tell you right now, but I'll tell you again.
Thank you. What you gonna say? Okay.
All right, gang. So let's get into today's topic. Really, I've been thinking about the intersection between privilege and nonviolence, usually in the context of the type of conversations we have on YouTube. And, you know, fortunately so far, we're not usually dealing with the aspect of physical violence, but more so the politics of civility, right? Like this idea that, you know, the calmest person in the room is the most reasonable, and, you know, people should be willing to, you know, respectfully go back and forth, and all of the both siding and the gaslighting. And it really, for me, it's always struck me as a privilege issue, right? Like I'm watching usually, you know, predominantly white channels with predominantly white men in the atheist community, you know, and having these conversations about social issues and political issues in a way that feels just so distant, like just so removed from these issues having any real impact or consequences in their lives. And then, of course, lately I've been dealing with, you know, all of the backlash from the whole William Freeman fucking Gurr debacle, you know, where there were so many people that played this game with me where, you know, I was treated like I was being so unreasonable because I was calling out potentially racist dog whistling. And then when it turned out to be exactly that, and outright racism, like, you know, the conversation shifted to my rage and lack of control of my emotions and, you know, all of this type of bullshit. But it fits into that same framework, right? Where there's a rhetoric and a sort of enculturation of what is considered civil, what is considered peaceful, and as a result of that, what means, tactics, and decorum are expected and acceptable when it comes to having a voice or, you know, having an influence on the world around you to try to get things to change. And it all comes down to people in power setting the stage so that they can determine how things go in a way that's going to minimize their exposure and discomfort at all times. So I don't know, when this stream popped up on the feed, I was really excited to jump into it. I haven't seen it yet, but that's why I was so excited to see this. So we're going to be looking at Jesse Gender talking about privilege and nonviolence. And yeah, gang, it's time to jump into the main event of the afternoon. And yeah, let's take off on this shit. I'm really excited about this, and yeah, let's go. Let's take off on this thing, gang. We're gonna transform, already blow up, Shuated.
Hello, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well. So I want to kind of have a video discussion where I want to introspect about a recent choice that I made surrounding an editing decision on the video that I released on my main channel on Friday surrounding the anti-trans bigotry that is growing more and more in the United States. Because I think this introspection that I'm having about the choice is something that I think we all need to be doing a lot more in a lot of our sort of advocacy as we work to fight growing authoritarianism and fascism within the United States. Especially for those of us who sit at an interesting intersection of having both certain levels of privilege in our country, especially being white like I am, while also having, you know, many different intersections of being oppressed, as I am as a woman and as a...
All right, yeah, sorry. I'm really sorry to hear that, Pinch. It's fucked. We're all still dealing with it. I've been dealing with it for years now, and I feel like for the longest time, I don't know if to say it was just I was quietly an atheist or silently an atheist, and And so for me, the last year has been crazy because I've actually been pretty much, deciding that, the relationships I have with most Christians is pretty toxic. And so I need to like deal with those. And that's meant actually talking to my family, in particular, my mom and her parents. But most of my conversations have been with my mom. But anyway, yeah. So I'm with you there. Like, for me, everything feels very raw, even though I've been an atheist for a while. I'm like in a place now where I can't like put that part of my life on the shelf for other people's convenience. So yeah, I don't know. We're glad you're here, and yeah, we're all in this together. So really, thanks for sharing.
As a trans person. In the video that I released on Friday, I had a sort of much longer discussion about the need to use self-defense in the face of violence being stoked against trans people. Right now, clearly we are seeing a rise in anti-trans rhetoric that is stoking violence against trans people, whether it be stochastic terrorism or it be state violence, like legislations being pushed against us, and many other different ways that violence has been sort of targeted at the trans community. And in that discussion, I talked about sort of this ongoing discourse that's been having right now around, trans people being seen as violent and bullies when pushing back against these authoritarian and harmful and genocidal rhetorics. One recent example of this discourse in microcosm was surrounding a recent counter-protest to Kellie J. Keane-Minshall that happened in New Zealand and Australia, where Kellie J. Keane-Minshall, the anti-trans figure, TERF, got hit with tomato juice. And I argued that, moments like that, where there is some sort of I hesitate to even call it physical violence because it's like tomato juice on her face, but some people would argue it as an assault, that is warranted in the face of, harm being done to the trans community. And that when...
All right, let's pause the tape right there. This is all bad, gang. None of us, I think, really want to promote violence. Let's say that, right? At the same time, this is the war on the LGBT community, in particular, the trans community, and the entire queer community is very violent, very violent. And there's always been violence against this community. Like, I remember like the whole Matthew Shepard thing. Like I could go like my whole life. There's been like really notable instances of this. I guess what I'm getting at is we have to be serious about this conversation about how you respond to violence. And it's so fucked up because it's the right-wing war on these people's lives that gives license to the violence against this community, personal, social, political, the whole thing. And then on top of that, they feed off of they feed off people's need to defend themselves, right? I mean, this is like, it's what you see with the Black Panthers, right? Or any sort of organized conversation and effort that is serious about, the need to meet force with force. So this is just difficult. and it fucking sucks, and it's really hard, but hey, you know, Pride Month needs to be about listening, and this is where we're at. So, man, it's really important. All right,
we sort of push back, whether we, you know, punch Nazis in the face or do things like that. That is self-defensive. That is a thing where you are pushing back against people stoking violence, who are often able to make their violence seem invisible through the use of state power or just using respectability politics. And one thing I mentioned in the video was there were people who understandably balked at this argument, who said, well, we should try to not use violence in any form. We should use nonviolence. And one of the things I said in the video was this. But even beyond the anti-trans talking points, there were many people who were trans supportive who seemed to balk at events like this. That we should be nonviolent in the face of violence being done against us.
I don't agree with the soup thing. What goes around comes around, and it may become a method or acceptable action to be taken by the other side against trans people and their allies. Great that the people are motivated to peacefully support their allies in such numbers.
A call for civility, to say, well, we should just debate them in the marketplace of ideas, or do nonviolent protests against them. I certainly very much understand where these comments come from. In fact, just a few years ago, I very much would have echoed them. They come from a understandable place of not wishing any violence to have to occur, and being upset at seeing violence happen. And the sometimes sweet, earnest, and somewhat innocent belief that the right cause can win without violence. And while I definitely think that nonviolence has its place in movements like this, and I think we should try to use it as a first tactic, it is sadly at the point where that may not be continually able to be the case. But we must remember that events like Stonewall, which sparked the modern LGBTQ rights movement, was itself a violent riot against state power. Sometimes you need to throw a brick at people who are willing to do more violence against you and your body. World War II itself was a war against fascism that was only won through violence. Violence is not something to be sought or desired, but fighting fascism is. While fascism and authoritarianism often gets to hide its violence through the utilization of state power, scapegoats, and stochastic terrorism, trans people and other marginalized groups who are harmed are often doing self-defense for ourselves quite publicly. And to be very clear, I am not sitting here being like, yay, I'm very excited about that fact. We also need to be honest about it. Sometimes beating fascism cannot be done or stopped non-violently. And it's important to note that when
this is the deal, right? It's like we're dealing with people. Onward, Christian soldier. We are dealing with people who understand this. And the game is about power. And they will not give up their power without force. I'm sorry. That's just how I see it. And that's the problem with the politics of civility. That's even like my critique of when I was talking about the guy that was on Mythvision stream yesterday, right? Just a seemingly, you know, harmless. Hey, we all got to sit down and talk to each other and hear each other out and. Yeah, but bro, the people that my enemies have already figured out that that's a fucking cheat code. You know, they're again, just like you said, they're happy to sit down at the table just to impress you. To play this silly ass game where they sit there and listen and want to hear the arguments and want to philosophize and then just go back to stoking stochastic state and often interpersonal violence. They don't care. They don't care. And that's the thing, but and what's really fucked up about it is, again, I'm always thinking this critique is super biased, right? It's usually only given towards the left, right? The left is always told, don't yell, don't raise your voice, don't don't use force, don't. What? Why? You won't say that to them. Why? Because you already know they're committed to doing those things. So what the fuck are we talking about here?
Are doing that, it is not because they themselves are violent or hateful. They are doing it out of self-defense. trans people pushing back against fascists calling for our genocide through state violence are being self-defensive. We are not the ones instigating the violence.
Boom.
And I still agree with that statement to a certain extent. That it is understandable that there are people who are like, I don't want to see any violence used because, you know, they don't like violence. And that's an understandable impulse. You know, we shouldn't want to use violence. I hate violence and I abhor violence. But the other thing that I didn't put in the video is this discussion about how that viewpoint is also coming from a certain place of privilege. There are people who don't have the privilege to not be able to push back against fascism and hate and bigotry. You know, we have to be self-defensive because people are literally causing violence against us. And to say that we should just take it on the chin is usually coming from people who aren't in direct harm. You know, that's why we have that poem that goes, you know, first they came for the socialists, then and da-da-da-da-da-da, so on down the line until they came for me and there was no one to stand with me. It's because the perspective of that poem is from someone who thought like, well, I don't need to stand up for them. You know, I'm seeing them being harmed, but like, I don't think we should be like fighting back that way because they had the privilege to not be worried at that moment for their own personal safety. And how it's important for not only people to fight back against these things when it is targeting them, but how other people should recognize when people are being targeted and come after them, not sort of rest in their privilege. And
Exactly. And like, gang, let's just make sure we're all clear about this. If you're an atheist, you're on that goddamn list. And this is the weird thing that I'm seeing so much out here in this, you know, YouTube space or new media, whatever the fuck we're doing, is that we can talk about racism. And people are like, yeah, the way we treat people of color and put them at the bottom of the ladder is super fucked up. We could talk about misogyny, and we're all like, yeah, there's the fucking patriarchy, and it's fucking awful, and you know, half the population is treated like they're fucking subservient. And then we could talk about bigotry against the queer community, and again, they're like, yeah, they'll kind of chain them up and drag them behind a truck and leave them to die in the middle of nowhere. It's pretty fucked up, the shit that the queer community. But for some reason, atheists, especially with a certain amount of privilege, really don't see the writing on the wall about what these people will do to the heathens. It's kind of odd. Like, y'all need to realize you were in the fucked up ass soup too.
say, no, I actually need to stand up for these people because they're being attacked, and later on down the line, I could be attacked too because fascism is a machine that constantly looks for another target to oppress to order to fuel its endless need for cult of death, cult of war, endless like infighting and sort of binary like us versus them rhetorics. So that element is very much, that desire to not wish to engage in violence or, self-defensive violence to be able to push back against rhetorics does come from a certain level of privilege. Now, that was something that I didn't even really think about discussing in the video because I was sort of writing the video very fast. I mean, I wrote this video in 2 days and things like that. But one thing that I did write and actually shoot for the video, but ultimately took out because I felt it was a bit of a sidetrack, and now I'm realizing much more that it actually was very pertinent to what I should have been discussing, there was a moment in the video where I actually called out people who were quoting Martin Luther King Jr. In videos that I had done earlier on that week where I discussed the Kelly G. Minshall situation to argue for nonviolence. Basically, they were arguing that Martin Luther King Jr. was a man who argued for nonviolent protest in the face of, harm being done to the black community. And that's an example that we should follow. And I'm going to show you the part of the video that I cut out. And then I want to have a little discussion afterwards about why I cut that section out of the video, beyond just me feeling it was a bit of a sidetrack. So here's the section. And please, by the way, do not quote Martin Luther King in my comment section as I saw other people in my other videos' comment sections do. While I completely understand that you are coming from a desire to not wish to see violence done, and I understand and empathize with that, it's important to remember that Martin Luther King Jr. himself was open about the sometimes regrettable need for violence in the face of hatred and violence being enacted against marginalized groups like black people that he was an advocate for. And he realized this before he himself was murdered violently, despite his repeated usage and calls for nonviolence to be used first in fights against discrimination and bigotry. Also, Martin Luther King...
Again, and the fucking irony, right? And here's what a lot of it comes down to me. It comes down to, like, the fear, and we tend to talk about it in racial terms, but it's like the fear of the vengeance of the marginalized groups, right? It's always felt like it's that voice in the back of the head of white power going, holy shit, if these people did to us what we did to them. Holy shit, if black dudes were willing to fucking strap up and let a couple off every time they felt, you know, the wrong white dude rang their doorbell or got a bit too close to him after having a few too much to drink and they weren't sure what his intentions were, right? Holy shit, if black cops were like, yo, bro, I'm a fucking rural fucking police officer, man. I hate to say, but like where I live is just fucking prime KKK territory. So yeah, I pulled that white dude over for speeding, and he told me he had a gun, but why would I let him reach for it? He went to reach for that thing, man. I unloaded half a clip in his chest right there. And then the people were like, well, you know, the black officer here, he clearly did fear for his life. So that's definitely not murder. You back on the job Monday? Back on the job Monday, huh, buddy? Sorry you were so stressed out by that white guy. Yeah, I know. It's pretty racist around here. So everyone, right? They're just so afraid of what the fuck would happen if we treated them like they have treated us. But you don't realize that that's the difference in the nature of it. Same thing out of the alt-right playbook, right? Where violence from the right is often offensive. Violence from the left is usually inherently defensive. We don't come from that perspective. We're not that way, right? Like you can't get by as part of a marginalized group if that's how you see things. Right, like it just doesn't work. So, you know, that's, to me, it's always been kind of ridiculous. Like, it's just not going to happen, right? We're not here to wield power or force with the same intent. Like, we just want to be left the fuck alone, and sometimes we need to, you know, use power or force to defend ourselves or make sure that we have the right seat at the table. But yeah, that fear, that insecurity, we need to find a way to deal with that. Because again, it's cool if individuals become aware of it, but the issue is how it influences our social structures, our policies, you know, sort of how it influences the handbook for society. And to me, that's a harder problem.
King Jr. was super anti-capitalist, by the way. Like, honestly, Martin Luther King Jr. is highly extraordinary in many ways. But the myth of Martin Luther King Jr. being a revered saint who worked to end racism solely through nonviolent and individual means is a narrative that is often wielded by conservatives to preach the idea that we should only be fighting those causing harm in the marketplace of ideas and ignore that systemic injustices even exist. A narrative which ultimately only serves those who cause harm because it legitimizes their arguments and pushes the idea to remain neutral in the face of violence being enacted, especially if that violence is being made invisible through systems and utilizations of state power, like anti-trans legislations are.
Today is the anniversary of the assassination of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. I was thinking, like, if he were alive today, I wonder what he'd think about such dismissive comments. And about a Democrat Party that believes it can regain power by...
Again, please go fuck yourself, gang. Is there any fucking chance that if Martin Luther King Jr. was alive right now, he would be having any thought other than, Laura Ingraham, shut the fuck up, please go fuck yourself, and never display my image on Fox News ever the fuck again. Please go fuck yourself. Like, listen, let me tell you two things that would be the real, okay? Martin Luther King Jr., if he were alive, would be the most vehemently anti-Fox News, anti-right-wing propaganda, keep my fucking name out of your mouth, god damn it, shit, if he were alive today. He would 100% be outraged every time these motherfuckers try to act like he said something to support their fucking bullshit. You know what the other alternative is, gang? Do you want to know what the other alternative, gang? I'll tell you what option number 2 is. Martin Luther King Jr. would be a fucking coon. Straight the fuck up. He would be considered one of them fucking out of touch Candace Owens, Jesse Lee Peterson, fucking licking the boots, dancing for Masters butter biscuits. If he ever found himself down with the fucking Fox News cause, he would literally have sold out, become a Creflo Dollar TD Jakes style mega preacher, and lost all relevancy in the black community if he was sitting on that Laura Ingraham tip. Please go fuck yourself, Fox News. Please go all the way fuck it. There's just no fucking way to make this work.
Living in a constant state of protest or racial hatred and denial.
Every one of us has a right to equal treatment by our government. That right is guaranteed by our Constitution. It's the heart of countless laws passed with well-deserved fanfare by our Congress over many decades. That right is inscribed on a monument on our National Mall to the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who would be shocked and disgusted if he watched Susan Rice on television today.
Okay, so I very much stand by what I say in that section. And I want to sort of go a little bit further for just a second here. In the last few years before Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, was murdered, he started to become much more leftist and sort of anti-capitalist and anti the system that oppressed many people of color, black people, and many others. In fact, here's a famous quote that a lot of people know, but sort of missed the beginning part of it.
Me say, as I've always said.
And honestly, I believe if he were alive today, again, he'd either be a coon or he'd be on that radical tip, y'all, because the meta has fucking changed, right? I'm gonna go ahead and be optimistic that this motherfucker, if he was still alive, wouldn't even be a Christian. Gang, I'm so fucking serious. I think the church was fucking like necessary and useful, and there was a lot of secular influence on him and the movement. You know what I'm saying? He really did end up quite progressive, quite anti-capitalist. Man, Martin Luther King, if he was down right now, he'd either be woke as shit. So that's where I think he might have even just been not, if he could do it all over, maybe not a Christian, right? But again, if he was on that Laura Ingraham white Jesus tip in 2023, I'd be calling him Martin Luther Coon my damn self.
Always continue to say that riots are socially destructive and self-defeating. I'm still convinced that non-violence is the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for freedom and justice. I feel that violence will only create more social problems than they will solve. That in a real sense it is impractical for the Negro to even think of mounting a violent revolution in the United States.
Now, gang, this is the principal core of nonviolent resistance. Like, it's a tactic, right? It's not saying don't use force to change the system. It's saying don't try to use a form of force that isn't a winning strategy for you. He's saying it would create more problems than it solves. Right? He's not saying there's no reason to ever be violent. He's not saying don't defend yourself. He's just saying when we look at the meta, what a bunch of Negroes gonna do with a few guns? Like, y'all ever heard of the U.S. Army? yeah, get out of rest. And I think this is still, by and large, true. It's a silly, ineffective tactic for most of us to try to use armed resistance. Come on, y'all. We talk about it all the time. We talk about it all the time. Look at January 6th. Look at January 6th. And what is the thought experiment everybody has done at least 30 times since January 6th? What would happen if those people were black? What would have happened if all those people were black? Y'all already know what would have happened if all those people were black. There would be no such thing as January the fuck-face 6th at all. It would be called a January 6th fucking, I don't know, rebellion or some shit like that. Like, I don't know. But bro, it would have been nothing but a bunch of dead Negroes getting carted off, thrown in the back of dump trucks, probably put in a mass grave. Probably just, no, they were insurrectionists. Sorry, their families don't get to bury them. Oh, did they have money? No, sorry, they don't get to leave their money to their children. No, what? No, they were insurrectionists. They don't get shit. They don't get shit. They got shot and they don't get shit. That's how this would have worked. Everybody knows this shit. That's what the fuck he's talking about. He's saying, Negro, if you think these white folks is gonna let you mount an armed resistance, you need to shut that shit down right now. And that's where privilege comes in. The irony, I was thinking about this getting ready for today's show, was that we could talk about the intersection of privilege and nonviolence, but you could also talk about the intersection of privilege and violence. Right? Because you have to have privilege to actually safely use violence, especially certain kinds of violence. I mean, honestly, even in a case of self-defense, if somebody robs my house as a black dude and I shoot them, that's not a good idea. Like, I'm probably going to jail. You know, just because some white guy broke into my house doesn't mean he deserved to die that day. If I was gonna have a gun in my home, I should have had enough training so that I could know to assess whether he was really a threat to me. And I could have shot him in the leg, and, you know, even though he had pulled out a gun, he hadn't actually extended the gun towards me, and they could tell that by the fucking forensic fucking analysis and all of the blase and the glavinoids. And they would find a way. Why? Because they're not gonna establish by law that if a white dude breaks into a black man's house, the black man has a right to shoot him dead in the fucking forehead and call it a day. Those laws are for white people. You know, are you stupid? Are you crazy? Don't you, come on, y'all. We're not gonna play fucking games on my goddamn channel. Those laws are for white people. So I'm just trying to make it clear, y'all. We're not nonviolent because we want to stroke your fucking ego. We're nonviolent because we have to find a different way.
So I will continue to condemn riots and continue to say to my brothers and sisters that this is not the way. Continue to affirm that there is another way. But at the same time, it is as necessary for me to be as vigorous in condemning the conditions which cause persons to feel that they must engage in riotous activities as it is for me to condemn riots.
Now, this is the part that all the other motherfuckers miss. All the bigots, all the fucking wafflers and fence sitters in the middle. All the fucking white moderate enablers. If you were gonna look in my face and tell me I need to be calm, cool, and collective, if you were gonna tell me I should not be popping off and losing my shit, if you're gonna insist that I don't mount armed resistance against my oppressors, your monkey ass needs to be working just as hard to oppose the conditions that create that situation to begin with. And that's what the fuck motherfuckers don't do. They just scold the fucking progressive people, scold the marginalized people, tell them they need to be calm, tell them they need to do nonviolence, tell them they need to be civil and peaceful. And then they're like, woo, I'm tired, time to get lunch. Oh, you ain't got shit to say to them over there? Ooh, no, it's just, you know, that took a while. It's time to go eat. It's 4:20, y'all. Let's light up mode and roll the tape.
I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. What is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises
thanks for joining me. That's so great.
have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And so in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention.
So, as you can hear at the beginning of that quote, is Martin Luther King Jr. saying, firstly, that, like, the ability for black people at the time that he was alive to fight back against the system was ultimately going to be very harmful to black people. And so he argued for nonviolence because that was the way to cause tension within the system and force the system to try to acknowledge and work for black people to sort of stop the oppression
without
of black
sacrificing
people.
black
And so he
bodies.
sort of recognizes not the fact that violence shouldn't be used, but ultimately he believed at that time that violence was something that was going to basically be a losing battle for black people, considering how ubiquitous the system is. But as he got later in his life before he was murdered, and I should call out FD Signifier's amazing video that is not released yet. He's going to be going into this in further detail. But one of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. sort of was wrestling with as he got further into his life was becoming more anti-capitalist, more leftist, and starting to understand that the system that oppressed black people and many others needed to continually be fought back against and pushed back against, and that it is often a conservative rhetoric that sort of erases this part of his history to just say you should call for nonviolence, just like Martin Luther King Jr. is. I'm not saying every conservative, every person who says like nonviolence is the way, in quotes, Martin Luther King Jr. is a conservative, but it is a conservative rhetoric to uphold the status quo, saying like use nonviolence because if you use nonviolence, it'll disrupt the status quo, and we don't want to do that. It's harmful, and so it ultimately keeps propping up the status quo of the system. And this is something that I think Martin Luther King Jr. himself, again, I'm sort of coming off the cuff as not like a deep scholar of his life, but something that, seemingly he was wrestling with as he got further into his life and started to recognize that the system was being harmful. So that's something that I encourage you all to learn more about from FD's video. He'll go into it in much greater detail, and I think it's a really great video.
Well,
but
he's
the
not a
last thing
fucking
that I want to
founding.
analyze in this little
He's not a founding father, so like. I don't know why people whip out MLK quotes. Like it's kind of a weird thing to do. Like, yeah, the man was definitely about his shit, and I consider myself a pretty big fan actually. Someone I read growing up and read as a young man, and you know, it's a good deal, right? But I don't think anybody should be treated like they were a source of infallible wisdom.
Discussion that we've been having here is the other element of why I took that section out of my video. Because I did say earlier, and this is true, I thought it was a little bit of a sidetrack from the point that I was making. And now I'm realizing, given everything that I just said, that it was actually a very pertinent thing to what I was saying. But I also have been doing a little bit of introspection, and I realized that the other reason that I did this, and I don't know if I was even conscious of it because I was editing and kind of dealing with a lot of other emotions at the time, but I sort of sit in here and think about, like, yeah, maybe that was an emotion that I was thinking, was the fact that, you know, by putting that section in the video, and maybe even by putting it here, there might be people who react negatively to this, is that some people would take that as an affront to them and say, like, oh, Jesse, there might have been people like cis people who were, like, trying to listen to the video and were agreeing with my points, but then they would have felt like I was confronting them and calling them a bad person for you know, wanting to quit MLK. And I realized that was an impulse on my part to not wish to make people look at this history of Martin Luther King Jr., to look at the fact that, yes, this man was someone who was understanding that we needed to fight the system, and didn't want to make people who I wanted to come out of the video feeling like, yeah, we need to fight the system, as I say in the video, feel bad for maybe having quoted Martin Luther King Jr. or not understood that element of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. And by censoring that part of the video, again, I don't know if this was conscious or not, but by censoring that, I sort of was trying to take away that moment of self-introspection on the part of the people watching the video, because maybe they would have had a sort of like balking reaction at that. And I understood, and I'm understanding now that that was an element of my privilege to want to cut out that section of the video for, so not to confront certain people in my audience with that reality of the long history of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. And it's something that I need to be better aware of, because I think, you know, it is important for me to constantly point out the intersectionality of so many of the fights that trans people that, you know, I am are facing alongside many other groups. You know, I've constantly talked about how the issues that trans people are facing in the United States are not ones isolated to just trans people, but are often intersecting with many other things like anti-Semitism and racism and things like that. And then on top of that, how many of these intersections make people of color within the trans community, like Black folks and especially Indigenous folks as well, face even greater harm. You know, Indigenous trans women and Black trans women and many other trans women of color face a lot more harm than I do as a white trans woman living in a state that is fairly trans affirming in the United States, despite the fact that, you know, I do face a lot of harassment and hate and things like that as well. But it is much more compounded for many others who aren't of my class or my race. And so I think that that is something that I need to be aware of, that I am sometimes, you know, I hope you all are seeing this, that I am trying my best to be more conscious of that and trying to center that more and more and more. But I am on a learning journey on that. And I think that, you know, I kind of want to be open about me being on a learning journey, not so that people don't hold me accountable and say like, oh, Jesse, she's just learning, she's figuring out, but to let all of you all know who may be on a similar learning journey as me, to know that it is a process of constantly introspecting and not letting that introspection make us feel paralyzed. We shouldn't feel like, we can't do anything, but to confront it in a way that allows us to have a more open and frank discussion so that we can stand in better solidarity with, you know, other communities that we are not a part of, but are also facing a fight that we are fighting all together against a system that harms us all in many ways, and also be more inclusive of the people who are within our communities that we, you know, hope to work within, like the trans community for myself, who are more harmed, and bring their voices forward for themselves and not speak for them, but try to acknowledge them more and try to bring them forward much more as well. And this is something I'm going to be doing much more in my videos. I've been trying to do already in my videos, but it's something that I just sort of like sat and thought about, even though it was like a 2-second part of my video, and realized, you know, I think, you know, I could have not had this discussion, and maybe this video will, you know, get people upset at me, but I hope you understand that I'm making this video off the cuff because I want to kind of acknowledge that this isn't something that, you know, it should be something that is like sat down and thought of when you're making videos and content and writing, but it's also something that we wrestle with in our everyday thinking about how we think
Hey,
about the world. So I want to
Spartan.
show you, hopefully,
Hey, Captain's
me
Desk.
wrestling with it as a person rather than as a person who wrote a script and sat down and performed a video for all of you. Hopefully that all made sense. And, you know, if I said anything dumb or offensive, please call me out in the comments. Again, I am on a learning journey and I want to be confronted with things that I screw up. But yeah, let's figure this all out together.
All right, gang. Yeah, that's just, you know, it's, yeah, I really actually appreciate that video. I mean, we've all got privilege in ways that we need to work through, and I still think it's pretty brave to acknowledge it publicly, which I guess, you know, argues for more grace for people who don't, because I realize that must be pretty difficult for a lot of people, and maybe not so much others. I think the more you do it, you kind of can get desensitized to it, but you know, I get that people feel exposed. I feel that way a lot when I'm doing certain subjects, especially because I react to stuff that I haven't seen, you know, and so a lot of times, you know, something hits me in real time and I'm like, all right, well, here we go. But yeah, this was really interesting. And again, for me, which I guess, you know, this speaks to a certain amount of privilege I have in my life, but there's, you know, I take violence a bit more broadly, and yeah, I think the way I see those things interacting mostly in my life, which is fortunately mostly free of physical violence, that it's the politics of civility thing, and she touched on it, and I think that does play out in our community all the time, where there's a very privileged perspective that, I don't know, it just feels invalidating, like, and it's also very, I don't know, irritating or something is like the word I'm looking for. Like, I don't want to do it. Like, I don't care, right? Like, you know, you got to do what you got to do, and at the end of the day, it's frustrating. Like, it's constantly frustrating to feel pressure to you know, go along with the status quo's expectations when you're like, I'm pretty sure that's not how I want to do things. And yeah, but it is what it is, and it definitely plays out in these conversations about violence. And I was thinking about this because Vosh was talking about violence at Pride events, and I found that very uncomfortable for me. But, you know, when I heard Jesse talking today, you know, it's just, again, it's something I'm sure the LGBTQ community is aware of, and so it's you know, it's like any of these other issues where you don't know what's gonna happen, but we're all wishing for the best. Me personally, I'm like, I think this is good. You know, I think part of moving things forward is changing the sort of meta social consciousness of people. And I think most people want to move in the right direction. And believe it or not, I actually think these type of conversations serve as a form of self-defense, right? So, like, let's think about it from the perspective of, like, the martial arts, right? And if I say like martial arts and self-defense, you probably think of like skill with hand-to-hand combat, maybe proficiency with weapons, right? But part of what, a lot of martial artists really are trying to get people to understand is, you keep all that in your toolkit, but that's not your first tool, right? Like, because if you can diffuse a situation or get out of a situation, that's an even easier path to, ending that situation safely and no harm done to anybody or risk of anything, more coming from a situation. And so, like, even if you can't, right, like, you're taught things like if you're about to get like jumped in an alleyway or something and you've got, 4 or 5 people circling in on you, find an exit. You can find an exit, leave, get out of there, right? That's your first strategy. If you can't, then usually, assuming you're in a hand-to-hand situation, like your goal is to find an exit. So you find one person who might be between you and a way to get the fuck out of there that seems vulnerable, attack the weak point and get the fuck out of there. So part of what I always had to keep in mind is sort of like, if you're worried somebody sketchy is coming to your house, like, you could reach for the shotgun under the bed, load it, cock that shit, and find a advantage position in the room or something, right? Or you could just like not and like walk out of your place completely unarmed and like go meet them at the road and see what's up and let them know it's not a really good time because you're in the family about to sit down for dinner, but they're welcome to give you a call. You know what I mean, right? And then we're up out of this bitch, you understand? And that to me is the perspective I think most of us are on, right? Is that the nonviolence and the educate and conversate and all of that is the go-to move. That's your A strategy, right? And any from there, right? We're talking about when that doesn't work or that's not effective. So it's not a either or, but it's mostly you got genuinely you lead with nonviolence. But the thing that I think is really at stake here is we have to think about how we respond to it, right? That to me is what this conversation is about. We could sit here and go through your decision tree about when you personally use violence or don't use violence. Hopefully, like I said, we're mostly on that same tip. Like, we can diffuse the situations and, hope to convince reasonable people to not be threats to us and things like that. But it's thinking twice to me about how we respond to stories of violence in the news. whose side we take when we hear stories of, you know, marginalized groups throwing tomato sauce on bigots or whatever, right? Like, that's where I feel kind of challenged as well. Like, because it's so easy to go to the gut level, kind of instinctual, oh no, we should be nonviolent, you shouldn't do that, I don't think you should throw tomato sauce on bigots because, you know, and I'm still in a place where, like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Because, again, I am of the, I'm of the persuasion that it does often create more problems than it solves. So even for the person, like, threw tomato sauce on that person, like, I'm sure their shit's been all types of fucked up since then. And that's even, like, myself. Like, I've, you know, like, there are situations in life where you might feel like it is warranted to defend yourself, right? But, you know, you expose yourself to harm and problems and situations and circumstances. And so that's why, like, it's you know, like, I have a whole, like, I'm just saying, a lot of my you know, preference for nonviolence isn't like, I don't know, thinking like I do think there's a moral value to it, right? But for me, it's like self-interest. Again, it comes down to, like I said, that those laws are for white people. Like, I really just don't, as a black man, like, I've just been convinced that, like, I don't have the same full kit of rights other people do. And, you know, so that's just, like, that's part of the equation. So it's just little shit, right? Like, if somebody says something stupid to me, I'm not gonna probably attack them. Like, if somebody walks up to me, like, if somebody can, like, again, like, I'm sure there's a point at which I'll defend myself, but I try to really raise the bar, right? Because I don't think that, like, you know, me and a dude exchange words at a bar, he pushes me, I smashed a beer bottle over his face because I'm not really good at fist fighting. and he's a lot bigger than me or some shit. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that's gonna work out for me. Like, so I don't, you know, you see what I'm saying? Like, it's just about personally not wanting more risk. It's more just like, I'm leaving this place or calling the authority. I'm probably not gonna call the cops. I don't like that, because then again, that's a weird thing, right? Like, even that part of it is like, I don't want to call the cops because you know, who knows what these people will say. Like, yeah, I ain't rolling the dice, you know. Again, this is all of the shit you go through, and you're like, nah, I'm just trying to get up out of here, right? But what about protests, stochastic violence, state violence, legislative violence? Man, you can't just walk away from those things. So that's what I mean too about the need to respond. And I feel weird because I often, like, don't do those things for my own safety, right? Like, I'm like, bro, I'm not trying to be out on the streets doing like an anti-racism riot or some shit goes down. You know, I do rallies and stuff like that. I don't want to make it sound like I'm not, but there is a certain, you know, line I've drawn where it's like, I don't want to put myself in a situation. Well, a lot of us do, but there is some privilege probably there, right? Where other people are not feeling like they're free to, you know, not take those measures. I do think there was a lot of growth during the Black Lives Matter movement from what I saw. By that I mean, it seemed like the type of things that people would routinely just condemn, people were sort of just like, yeah, okay, I'm not encouraging people to break the law, but also this is about, violence against black people. And like people didn't really like take the bait, right, of condemning the rioters or speaking out against the protest. Now, obviously the right wingers did. I don't mean like nobody, but it felt like there was a real meaningful shift. I certainly felt it in my own personal response to these things. Obviously, having this conversation today, we're not all the way there yet, but I definitely felt like, whoa, like we're able to see through the noise a bit here and kind of stay focused. Don't know if we've stayed vigilant, but we've diligent. I don't know. One of them fancy words. Insert fancy words here. I'm stoned. But yeah, this is like things, right? So I've been trying to get into more serious topics on the channel, and from time to time, and want to talk about racism. We've been doing more of that. We've got an endless list of things to cover, but privilege is definitely something we've been needing to get into more a little bit here. And yeah, it hits me really hard because I feel like it plays out every day in terms of the YouTube atheist space and the way we like tone police and shit like that. Boom. See, I got another good word. All right, let me get up out of here since I got another good word in there. Yeah, that's how we got to do this. Before I make myself look like an idiot, you sound like an asshole again. But yeah, gang, come hang out and gather. I have a meeting at 5, and then after that we'll be hanging out and gather. I need to keep packing. Moving day is Friday, but yeah, we should have some fun tonight, just relaxing and gather. I had some internet issues last night, but everything seems to be going okay. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. It's been fun, and it's really nice to do these streams here and take my mind off all the stress for a little bit. So appreciate you guys. Thanks so much, gang. We'll see you next time.